7 Israeli military commanders are dead. Not wounded, not evacuated, not listed as missing in action pending assessment. Dead. Eliminated simultaneously in a single precision strike by a weapon system that the most sophisticated air defense architecture in the Middle East could not stop, did not stop, and based on everything I know from years inside the military intelligence community, was never going to stop. And the question that is echoing through every secure briefing room from Tel Aviv to Washington to Brussels right now is not what happened. They know what happened. The question is one that no official spokesperson is going to answer honestly in any press conference you will watch today. The question is, how did Iran know exactly where they were? That question is the one I am going to answer for you, because the answer is more alarming than the missile itself. And the missile is already the most operationally significant weapons demonstration this conflict has produced. If you are new to this channel, subscribe now, because what I am about to walk you through is the operational picture that exists underneath the official statements, the picture that the press offices are working right now to make sure you never fully assemble. Let me start with the Fattah-2 itself, because this is where every mainstream outlet is going to give you a technically accurate and strategically useless description. They will tell you it is a hypersonic missile. They will tell you it travels at speeds exceeding Mach 5. They will show you graphics of a missile arcing through the atmosphere, and they will use words like advanced and sophisticated and unprecedented. None of that will tell you what you actually need to understand about why 7 commanders are dead and why the air defense systems designed to prevent exactly this outcome failed to function as advertised. The Fattah-2 is Iran's second-generation hypersonic boost glide vehicle. It is not a cruise missile. It is not a conventional ballistic missile. It is a ballistic missile that releases a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle in the terminal phase of flight, specifically in the phase where every air defense system in the current Israeli inventory is engineered to make its intercept attempt. That distinction is not a technical footnote. It is the entire operational story. Here is what terminal phase maneuvering actually means for a defense system trying to stop it. A conventional ballistic missile follows a predictable arc. The physics are computable from the moment of launch. The trajectory is solvable. The Arrow-3, Israel's high-altitude ballistic missile interceptor, the system that represents the top layer of a defense architecture that the Israeli government has spent billions of dollars and decades of development constructing, is built around a single foundational assumption. That assumption is that the incoming warhead will be where the physics say it will be at the moment the interceptor arrives. You solve the geometry. You place the kill vehicle at the solution point. You achieve intercept. The Fattah-2's glide vehicle breaks that geometry at the exact moment the defense system commits to it. When the glide vehicle separates from the booster and begins its maneuvering descent, it can offset its terminal impact point by several kilometers from the trajectory that the Arrow-3's fire control system has computed. The interceptor is being sent to a location the Fattah-2 has already decided to vacate. The engagement geometry collapses at the precise moment it cannot be recovered. I have spent years in rooms where these exact threat assessments were being compiled and briefed to decision makers who had the authority to fund the countermeasures. I can tell you with professional certainty that the maneuvering hypersonic terminal phase problem is not a surprise to anyone holding a clearance in this field. It has been assessed, war-gamed, and briefed. The conclusion of those assessments was consistent. The current defensive architecture has no reliable answer to this class of threat. None. And today that assessment stopped being a classified document and became 7 flag-draped coffins. Now let me tell you about the target, because this is where the analysis moves from alarming to something that belongs in a different category entirely. A category that I want to be precise about, because precision is the only thing that separates serious analysis from the noise that fills your feed. 7 senior Israeli military commanders in a single strike. Not a patrol, not a convoy on a road, not a forward operating position that sits in a predictable location. 7 commanders gathered in a command and control facility, a secured, hardened, access-controlled military node of exactly the type that military planners design specifically to be difficult to target precisely because the people inside it are too valuable to lose. I want you to understand what targeting this facility required. Not in the sense of what missile was used, in the sense of what intelligence had to exist before a single launch order was given. To eliminate 7 specific senior commanders simultaneously, the targeting cell that planned this strike needed to know that those 7 specific people would be in that specific facility at that specific time. That knowledge does not come from satellite imagery alone. Satellite imagery tells you the facility exists. It tells you vehicles are present. It tells you activity levels are elevated. It does not tell you which commanders are inside a hardened building at a particular hour on a particular day. That knowledge comes from one of 3 sources: human intelligence with access to the command scheduling process at a level senior enough to know who attends which briefings; signals intelligence collection refined to the point where it can correlate specific communication signatures with specific personnel locations inside a secured facility in real time; or a combination of both, sustained over a long enough period to establish the patterns that make a strike window identifiable when it opens. Having spent years inside the intelligence apparatus, I know what each of those collection methods requires to produce targeting data at this level of precision. It requires penetration. It requires time. It requires the kind of sustained, patient, disciplined intelligence operation that does not improvise and does not rush. What happened today was not an opportunistic strike against a target of convenience. It was the execution of a targeting package that had been developed, refined, and held ready for the right moment. And the right moment was today. That means someone or some network with access to the internal operational rhythms of the Israeli military command structure provided the information that made this possible. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the only logical inference from an outcome in which 7 commanders are dead in a single precision strike. The missile found them because someone helped the missile find them. Subscribe if this level of analysis is what you have been looking for, because this is the layer of the story that no press briefing will ever reach. Let me now walk you through the mathematics of what this strike actually costs both sides, because cost is where the gap between official narrative and operational reality becomes impossible to close with words. The Fattah-2's production cost, based on publicly available assessments of comparable hypersonic glide vehicle programs scaled to Iranian domestic industrial capacity, is estimated between $3 and $8 million per unit. The Arrow 3 interceptor costs approximately $2 million per round. In a standard layered engagement against a single high-value ballistic threat, Israeli air defense doctrine calls for multiple intercept attempts across multiple defense layers to maximize kill probability. A full layered engagement attempt against one incoming Fattah-2 represents a defensive expenditure of $4 to $10 million against a missile that cannot be reliably intercepted by the architecture you just activated. But here is the number that should concentrate every defense planner's attention more than the per-unit cost. The 7 commanders killed in this strike represent the accumulated investment of decades of military education, operational experience, institutional knowledge, and command authority. You cannot put a dollar figure on the loss of a senior military commander in the way you can price an interceptor. You can only understand it in terms of what it takes to produce another one. Years, sometimes decades, and in the middle of an active conflict, those years do not exist. Iran spent 1 missile and eliminated irreplaceable human capital from the command structure. The cost exchange in this transaction does not run on a spreadsheet. It runs on a timeline, and the timeline for replacing what was lost today is longer than the timeline for producing another Fattah-2. Let me now show you the specific gap between what the official statements will tell you and what the operational picture actually shows. Because in the hours following a strike of this magnitude, the information environment becomes a battlefield in its own right. The official military response will use language designed to frame this event as a terrorist attack rather than a successful precision military operation. That framing is strategic. Calling it terrorism places it in a legal and moral category that avoids the more uncomfortable implication that a state actor just conducted a successful decapitation strike against senior military leadership using a weapon system the defending military could not stop. Terrorism implies criminal action against civilians. Precision elimination of military commanders in a command and control facility is not terrorism under any serious application of international law or military doctrine. It is war. The American response will emphasize the unprecedented nature of the strike and stress that all options remain on the table. I want you to understand what that phrase means coming from a government in the immediate aftermath of an ally losing 7 senior commanders to a single hypersonic strike. All options remain on the table is not diplomatic boilerplate in this context. It is the specific formulation used when kinetic responses are being actively considered and the political authorization process has not yet completed. What neither statement will address is the intelligence failure. Neither statement will acknowledge that a foreign military's targeting cell knew the precise location and schedule of 7 commanders well enough to eliminate them simultaneously. Neither statement will address the penetration of the information environment that made this possible. Because acknowledging that penetration requires acknowledging that the security architecture protecting military leadership has been compromised at a level that has not been publicly admitted. That is the gap. The official statements describe the outcome. They do not describe the conditions that made the outcome possible, and the conditions are the story. Now, let me take you inside what is happening in every Allied capital right now because the strategic signal this strike sends extends far beyond the immediate military picture. In every NATO defense ministry, the same assessment is being run. The question being asked is not about Israel specifically. The question is about the class of threat the Fattah-2 represents and whether the existing air defense architecture of any NATO member state has a reliable answer to it. The Patriot systems deployed across NATO's eastern flank were designed against a threat generation that predates maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicles. The THAAD batteries that represent the American contribution to Allied missile defense were optimized for the ballistic trajectories the Fattah-2 deliberately abandons in its terminal phase. The honest answer to the question being asked in those ministries is the same answer the defending Air Defense Command is confronting today. No, the current architecture does not have a reliable answer. In the capitals of every state that has been watching Iran's missile program develop over the past decade, the Fattah-2's performance today is being recorded as a capability benchmark, not a theoretical capability, not a claimed capability, a demonstrated capability with a confirmed result. 7 dead commanders is not a test firing over open water. It is operational proof of concept against a defended high-value target in an active conflict environment. And in the planning cells of every adversary of Western-aligned states who have been watching this conflict as a live test bed for their own capability development programs, the data points from today's strike are being entered into models that will shape procurement decisions, doctrine, revisions, and strategic calculations for the next decade. I spent years watching the gap between the operational capabilities that adversaries were actually developing and the threat assessments that were reaching political decision makers. The gap was always the same direction. The assessments were always more optimistic than the capabilities warranted, and when the optimistic assessment met the actual capability in an operational environment, the result always looked like today. Let me tell you something about deterrence theory that most people outside classified environments never hear stated directly. Deterrence does not rest on the existence of weapons. It rests on the credible communication that those weapons will work as advertised when used against the target they were designed to defeat. The entire investment in Arrow 3 and David Sling and the layered missile defense architecture that has been the centerpiece of Israeli strategic communications for a decade, all of it was premised on the deterrent message that precision ballistic strikes against high-value, fixed targets cannot succeed because the defensive system will stop them. That message was the deterrent, not the interceptors themselves. The belief in the interceptors. Today, that belief took a direct hit in the same building where 7 commanders lost their lives, and a deterrent system whose credibility has been visibly damaged in front of every watching adversary is not a deterrent anymore. It is a hypothesis that has been tested and found wanting. The Fattah-2 did not just defeat a missile defense system. It defeated the strategic communication built around that system, and rebuilding that communication requires either a demonstrated technical fix, which does not exist yet, or a retaliatory action so overwhelming that it reestablishes the cost calculus on different terms. Neither option is clean. Neither option is fast, and the strategic vacuum that exists in the space between today's strike and whatever comes next is exactly the operational environment that an adversary with a mature hypersonic program and a patient intelligence apparatus will continue to exploit. Iran has not finished. What today demonstrated is that the targeting methodology works and the weapon works. The combination of those two validated capabilities does not get retired after a single use. It gets applied again against the next target set at the moment of Iran's choosing. The window between this strike and the next application of the same doctrine is not a period of stability, it is a planning cycle. Now I want to address something that the technical and strategic analysis I have just laid out does not fully capture: the psychological dimension. Because in warfare, what a weapon system does to the physical environment is only half the story. What it does to the decision-making environment of the people on the receiving end is often the more consequential half. Think about what it means to be a senior military officer in that command structure today. You walked into a secured facility this morning the same way you have walked into secured facilities hundreds of times before. You sat in a briefing with colleagues. You operated inside a security perimeter that your entire training and institutional experience told you represented the maximum achievable protection for people at your level of the command hierarchy. And somewhere in that process, a Fattah-2 arrived and 7 of your colleagues ceased to exist. Not on a battlefield, not in the field, in exactly the kind of protected environment that was supposed to be beyond the reach of this threat. I have been in enough military environments to know what that moment does to institutional confidence. It does not break it overnight. It erodes it quietly, systematically, in the calculations of every officer who must now sit in a secure briefing room and ask themselves a question they were never supposed to have to ask. Is this room actually secure? That question, once planted, does not leave. It changes how briefings are scheduled. It changes how long commanders remain in any fixed location. It changes whether the aggregation of senior leadership that effective military command requires can happen at all under the operational tempo this conflict demands. Iran did not just strike a command node. Iran struck the assumption of safety that allows command nodes to function. And that assumption, once broken, cannot be restored by a press release or a retaliatory strike. It can only be restored by a demonstrated counterintelligence success that removes the penetration that made today possible. And that success may never come. Let me close with what I believe is the most important dimension of this strike, the one that will not appear in any official statement, any press briefing, or any analysis produced by someone who has not spent time inside the actual machinery of military intelligence. The Fattah-2 can be produced, studied, and eventually partially countered. Missile defense is an iterative engineering problem, and history shows that every offensive capability eventually produces a defensive response, even if the response is imperfect and expensive. That is the nature of weapons development. It moves in cycles. The intelligence penetration that made today's strike possible does not work that way. Human networks that have achieved the level of access demonstrated by today's targeting do not get neutralized by an engineering fix. They get neutralized by counterintelligence operations that are slow, uncertain, resource-intensive, and frequently unsuccessful even when conducted by services with decades of experience and massive institutional investment. And while the counterintelligence operation is running, and while the search for the penetration is ongoing, the network that enabled today's strike remains active and potentially capable of enabling the next one. 7 commanders is the visible result. The invisible result is the question that now hangs over every command and control facility, every scheduled briefing, every gathering of senior officers in a secured location, every moment of operational coordination that requires commanders to be in a known place at a known time. The question is, does Iran know we are here? And the honest answer, the answer that the intelligence community is wrestling with right now, is that they do not know the answer to that question. And not knowing the answer to that question changes how every subsequent operational decision gets made. That is what Iran purchased today with one Fattah-2 and the intelligence package that guided it. Not just 7 commanders, the persistent uncertainty that now shadows every aggregation of military leadership in any fixed location. Share this analysis. Subscribe if you want the operational picture before it becomes the official version. Because the official version is being written right now with the specific purpose of managing your perception of events rather than informing it. The math is what it is, the missile performed, the intelligence held, And the 7 commanders who did not come home today are the proof of concept for a capability that no one in an official press briefing will describe to you with the clarity that operational reality demands. Pay attention, because this is the moment that changes how this conflict gets fought going forward. And understanding what actually changed, technically, strategically, and in the intelligence dimension, is not optional anymore. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the next development in this conflict will move fast, and the gap between the official version and the operational reality will be exactly as wide as it was today. You deserve to see both sides of that gap before the decisions get made.